Hello and welcome to Legal Basics with Cyro Law Global, and my name is Sian. Now, all human beings have natural biases and prejudices. Maybe you go to the workplace and a certain person looks a lot like your dad and you like him. I know this girl that serves tea looks so much like that niece of yours. I mean, those prejudices and biases are very, very normal. So in the kawaida office environment, you will find that there's maybe a little bit playing favorites. You'll find there's a kagal toto, the one that like the boss likes, the one that the boss says, people say, go and tell the boss we want team building. Those are just the soft things. But also in that office environment, there's also the big things where you do the same work with people. They get promoted, you don't, because maybe your seniors have certain views about your race or the way you look or about which country you come from. And then such things create a horrible business environment. And then you end up being victimized. So today we are going to discuss discrimination at the workplace. And my guest today is not new to our screen. Still, I will let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Sian. My name is Lorraine Oyombe, and I am a legal practitioner in Kenya. I've been an advocate for the last 7 years.
Karibu.
Thank you.
So Lorraine, just explain to us what is discrimination at the workplace, and where does the law draw the line between a very natural preference and something that victimizes other workers?
Okay. So when you look at discrimination, it's something that has been defined specifically for the workplace by the ILO. And basically what they say is that discrimination is any exclusion, distinction, or preference on the basis of race, sex, color, social origin, and any other characteristics that has the effect of nullifying or impairing equality in employment. So basically, it's something that you introduce that creates an unequal status between employees.
Okay.
So, for example, in an employment scenario, it could also cover anything that creates an inequality in trainings, promotions, remunerations. Anything that creates that inequality would amount to discrimination.
All right. So are there certain allowable things within the employment space based on things that people are naturally better at than others, and so they get that advantage? For instance, maybe in our African culture, women are known to cook. So if you had two office assistants and you needed maybe the one to be making tea, some people would naturally choose the female over the male, which is a bias based on gender.
Okay. So what I would say is that it is not discrimination to have a preference based on the inherent requirements of a job.
Okay.
So what that means is the most basic example I can think of is different jobs require different qualifications. For example, if you want to be in a medical degree, the medical field, you need to have had some sort of medical education. But I, with my legal, as much as I would really want to, would not. So you can't claim I'm being discriminated. Yet the kind of job that you need me to do needs me to have this skill set or these qualifications. So that's what is allowed. And then also we have policies which promote affirmative action. And you know, affirmative action is where you are addressing a pre-existing inequality and you're intentionally making allowances to a specific marginalized group to bring them up to speed and try and cure that inequality. So if you have an affirmative action policy, for example, you've decided that you are going to hire more young people, then someone who is not in that category claim that they're being discriminated, because what you're doing is correcting an existing inequality.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because as far as affirmative action goes, and maybe because of the media and because of the public conversations, people imagine that affirmative action is only as regards to gender.
To gender, yeah.
And yet it is really across the board.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe you can make a comment about that, there's certain countries that they even look for certain tribes
Yes,
that
actually,
have been left out.
Yes, minority tribes, and also when you're looking at issues of diversity and inclusion, disabilities. So affirmative action is just not limited to the gender aspect. It's a broad principle and a broad concept, and it's normally the aim is to try and bring that marginalized group up to speed or and in an equal position compared to the rest. So you'll find that a lot of resources and a lot of time will be taken for those policies, and it may result in the people who are already in the beneficial group, so to speak, feeling left out. But in the true essence, they're not being left out. It's just now the focus has shifted to someone else. Yeah.
And now, whenever the issue of affirmative action comes, there's also the issue of merit. So if, let's say, you and I started a job on the same day, but I'm disabled, and they feel like we need to have a disabled person in the management, and now because I'm disabled, they give me a management job. So they've promoted me above you, yet we did the same job and we have the same qualification had on the same day.
Yes.
But now, your work is probably better than mine, or you in terms of merit, you're a better place to have gone to the management job than I did. How are the courts balancing the need for affirmative action and the need to also pay attention to merit?
Okay, so I would say that the courts and the law specifically is really pro-affirmative action, because if you look at the Employment Act under Section 5, it's one of the categories that's excluded as a discriminative practice.
Okay.
So I would say it's something that is widely promoted, and actually the same Employment Act obligates the court to promote equality.
Okay.
Our Constitution also provides that we are all equal and we're all entitled to equal treatment before the law. So you'll find that any policy that is designed to promote that equality will always be upheld.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we are the millennials.
Yes.
And we have been, they've spoiled our name. They've said we are entitled. We are the workplace. We have too many needs. Our parents walked into a job on the first day and they held it until retirement. They didn't care much whether there was impact, whether they were fulfilled. And since now we're judged because we want to be happy, we want to be treated equally. We have all these needs that are not just the salary and the job description. So just paint the picture for the viewer. What are some of the events that would amount to a discrimination?
Okay. So a discrimination, first of all, is, if you look at the law, they have very specific categories. And I would say those categories which have been placed in the law are what I would call direct discrimination.
Yes.
For example, the law says you shouldn't treat someone differently on the basis of race, color, gender. So those are pretty direct, so that you can clearly say, if I'm being marginalized because I'm a woman, that's gender-based discrimination.
Yes.
There's also indirect discrimination, where the employer may come up with policies which have the effect of making you unequal.
Okay.
For example, the one that comes to the top of my mind is a scenario where religious reasons apply in the employment. For example, if you have a policy which requires someone to come to work on a particular day,
and it's a worship,
and that is their worship day, and it is mandatory. So when the person raises the concern that, excuse me, this policy you've made is making me, because I can't participate in my religion, yet someone else who is not in that religion, it doesn't have the same effect on them.
Okay.
So you see, that's indirect. No one has told you don't practice.
They've just made it impossible.
Yes.
For you to be able to meet that expectation.
Yes.
But what about the situation where when people are treated equally, they ask that a different they ask that different rules apply to them. I've seen people who say that, but I'm a woman, I cannot work late. Or why did they transfer my colleague because he's a male? Or they say no, that position should have gone to the other person because they are not married. Isn't some these are some of the issues that people
actually you're very right, because such issues, it doesn't even also have to be policies, even a practice, the way you say it, being chosen for a particular job just because you're a woman, and that's the only reason. You see, you remember, if we go back to the ILO definition, it could be a distinction or exclusion because of that specific reason. So if that is the only reason why you are in that situation and no other reason, then definitely it's discrimination. And then I also need to point out that for our local laws, for the Employment Act, an employee covers even a prospective employee. That means even the candidates who you're considering for a role in your organization, you are not supposed to discriminate against them in the same way you're not supposed to discriminate against someone who's already your employee.
Okay, that is interesting.
Yes.
Because this means that the employer has an obligation not to discriminate even at the point of recruitment.
Yes, even at the point of.
So can a person, well, this is an example. A friend of mine who is a very sharp lawyer, by the way, when she was looking for pupillage, she went to several firms and she was so heavily pregnant. And because classically a pupil is expected to run around, and in her story, she says, I could tell that I had passed the interview except for the fact that I was so heavily pregnant. Can such a person claim that they were not chosen just because they were discriminated because of now the pregnancy, for instance?
Yes, yes. It's very possible for her to claim that because the employer, the obligation cuts across prospective employees and existing employees. And if she's able to show that there was no other reason she was not chosen
except the fact that she was pregnant,
then that should be able to succeed in that. And also, I think there's been a case on that. If you look at this Kashindi's Digest of Employment Cases on page 83, one of the cases which is being discussed is a case involving, okay, the name of the parties have been blurred, but it's a case where a lady was expectant and it was her second pregnancy actually with that employer. And what happened is one day she was informed that her employment had been terminated and she was told that she has become costly to maintain. And in fact, she hasn't even been performing well. And the court found that the only reason she was treated like that was because she was pregnant. Because her previous performance reviews were good and she had some medical issues which arose during the back-to-back pregnancies. And that was what the employer was using against her to tell her that
she'd become
costly. And the court mentioned that that is pregnancy discrimination, and she was given compensation for that.
Wow. Yeah. Actually, previously on this broadcast, in season 1, we looked at maternity leave and annual leave. And at some point, you were even joking that it must be nice being an employee because the law allows you to take up to 5 months in that year that you're pregnant with full pay, and yet you don't come to work. So, of course, looking at it from a capitalist point of view, a person can easily think a pregnant woman is a liability to the business because I'm going to pay her, and for 5 months, I'll need somebody else to do her work. But which is outrightly unfair because people have to reproduce. But now, if a person feels like they have been discriminated, for instance, I do the same work, I come at the same time every day, he earns 500,000 but I earn 50. Or sometimes I feel like only the men get promoted or only the light skin. Sometimes it's a very silly things. How does a person like that get recourse?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the person who is feeling discriminated against can get recourse, of course, approaching the employment court. My advice would ordinarily be, before rushing to court, as any ordinary human person, of course, raise it with the people who've hired you.
Concerned.
Bring your grievance. I think that would clarify or would qualify as a grievance. So bring it up, bring your issues, give the people the opportunity to address it.
Yeah.
Because also sometimes maybe it's not overt, or maybe it's so entrenched in them that they didn't see it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
But
they're not aware. Actually,
they're not aware.
You can't discriminate, and you
unconsciously. Really, it's just the way things happen. So once you bring it out and you still haven't gotten you haven't gotten satisfied, or they haven't addressed it, then you can approach the court, and you can get remedies, which include damages, which will most of the time restore you to that position as if you weren't being discriminated against.
I'm sure the viewer is wondering how much. How much are they gonna pay me for saying dark skins cannot sit at reception?
Yes. So the principles the court normally looks at, of course, for discrimination and any other payment of damages, it's really just to restore you. So it would not really, I wouldn't say it's something that attracts so much money, but the court balances the needs. They have to be reasonable in any reasonable society, and they are not meant to enrich. So it's really to address that breach. So courts have awarded numerous figures, any figure between, I would say, 500,000 to 5 million, 8 million, depending on the case, depending on what is actually happening.
Now, how does an employer, just to wrap it up, how does an employer stay safe from such claims?
So the one thing an employer needs to know is, when it comes to discrimination, it's their obligation to prove that the discrimination did not happen.
The burden of proof is on the employer.
So the employee really just needs to bring out the allegation.
To just say, hey, this boss, he only promotes males or guys under 35.
Yes, they don't need to prove. So when that happens, you as an employer, you'll be given that obligation to prove that, no, in fact, there's no discrimination here. And then secondly, the law gives the employers the obligation to eliminate discriminative policies and to strive to have equality in the workplace. So you see, if you have policies which govern the employment, you always have to constantly review them to make sure they are meeting the discrimination thresholds, and you always have to be aware that the burden is yours to make sure there's equality. It's not on the employee, it's not anybody else.
I think that burden of proof is unfair, though. Because I mean, it's just another person alleging, and then it's me to prove that I don't. Honestly, I think that one is
it's
a little bit unfair. But as you say, generally it's not good to discriminate. It's one of the rights guaranteed under the Constitution that a person will not be discriminated.
Article 27 gives everyone equality before the law. So any practice or anything that puts you at an unequal position is unconstitutional, and
it's a violation of your constitutional rights. I think we always learn from Lorraine. We should pay school fees. Thank you so much for coming. I would ask her how we will reach her, because I know what she will say. Because I am her appointed secretary, so you write to me with your compliments. I know there will be a lot of compliments, with your questions, with your queries, even with your complaints, even saying, she left out that part. And you can reach me on info@cyroglobal.com. That's info@cyroglobal.com. You can also reach us through our old Gmail address, that is cyrologlobal@gmail.com. Before we close our broadcast, we would like to thank Mushiri Frames, who is our videography crew responsible for this great video work. By the way, we look prettier on video than in person. Alafu. And then we would also like to say thanks to J. Ojuma Advocates for facilitating the shooting of this series. Bye-bye, and take care of yourselves.
Thank you.